Walk into a municipal water plant or industrial facility, and you'll see operators making daily rounds. When they check a pump, the primary metric they look at is the discharge pressure gauge to confirm the system is hitting its numbers. When a massive industrial machine kicks on, you can feel the physical force vibrating through the concrete. Because of that raw power, it is easy to assume that the number on the discharge gauge represents the exact amount of work the pump is exerting. But that math is incorrect. A discharge reading of 100 psi does not mean the pump mechanism itself actually added 100 psi of pressure to the fluid. To understand the actual workload, we have to evaluate the intake side. In a flooded suction setup, the water source sits physically above the pump. Gravity pushes the fluid down into the casing, providing a positive starting pressure before the impeller even turns, say 20 psi. The pump only has to make up the difference. It takes that initial 20 psi and raises it to the 100 psi target. The machine is only performing 80 psi of actual work. The physics invert completely in a suction lift scenario. Here, the water source sits below the intake. Before the pump can push anything forward, it must pull a vacuum, perhaps -5 psi, just to draw the water up into the housing. That initial vertical pull requires immense mechanical effort. The fluid is actively fighting gravity every inch of the way upward before it ever makes contact with the spinning impeller to be pressurized. Because the pump starts in a negative pressure deficit, hitting that same 100 psi discharge target requires more energy. You add the 5 psi of vacuum lift to the 100 psi of required output, resulting in a total mechanical workload of 105 psi. This isolation of the machine's actual contribution, the discharge minus any positive intake pressure, or plus negative vacuum lift, is defined as the pressure boost. If an operator evaluates a pump by reading the discharge gauge in isolation, they lack the context needed to identify the system's actual energy demand. To accurately calculate that workload during the design phase, engineers must look past the mechanical equipment itself and map the physical geography of the entire piping network. The first variable they define is static head. This is the pure vertical distance the water must be lifted against gravity, measured directly from the starting intake water level to the final discharge elevation. This technical diagram shows how static head changes based on the physical plant layout. Note the brackets marking total static head on the right side of both configurations. In alternative A at the top, the pump sits above the source water. The suction lift required to pull the water up to the pump must be added to the final discharge elevation to calculate the complete static head. Contrast that with alternative B. Because the supply reservoir sits above the pump, creating a positive suction head, that initial elevation advantage reduces the total vertical distance the machine has to overcome. Environmental sources introduce a shifting variable. When drawing from a deep well, the starting elevation of the water is rarely constant once operation actually begins. This schematic of miscellaneous pump systems highlights the environmental variation on the far right. Look at the bracket labeled Drawdown during pumping. When a high-capacity pump activates, it rapidly drains the immediate column of water, dropping the localized surface level. Engineers must plot this lowest anticipated final pumping level to establish a safe, conservative static head calculation. Gravity is not the only force stealing energy. As water travels, the friction of scraping against pipe walls, navigating sharp elbows, and squeezing through control valves creates continuous, measurable resistance known as friction loss. By summing the maximum vertical static head and the total pipe friction loss, we arrive at the foundational metric for sizing equipment: total head, or total pump pressure. Total head proves that a pump's required workload is dictated by the physical geography of the site and the geometry of its pipes, regardless of the size of the motor bolted to the floor. Once the total head is mapped, we can translate that physical geographic resistance into the exact electrical power required to operate the system. We visualize this calculation as a three-tier cascade of power transfer. Energy is drawn from the electrical grid at the bottom, passed through the mechanical pump in the middle, and finally delivered into the fluid at the top. The top tier is water horsepower. This represents the pure, theoretical physical work required to lift a specific weight of water to a defined height every minute. It is calculated by taking the design flow in gallons per minute multiplying it by the total head in feet, and dividing that product by a standard mathematical constant of 3,960. However, water horsepower is an idealized number. It assumes a perfect machine transferring 100% of its kinetic energy to the fluid without any loss, a physical impossibility. Moving down the cascade, we reach the middle tier, brake horsepower. This is the actual mechanical torque the drive shaft must deliver to the impeller to hit the system's target. Brake horsepower accounts for the physical realities of the machinery. Energy is constantly lost to internal water slippage, the friction of routing fluid out of the discharge port, and axial thrust within the pump volute. To find the brake horsepower, we take the ideal water horsepower and divide it by the manufacturer's pump efficiency percentage. Because efficiency is always a fraction, this dictates a higher power input at the shaft. The degradation continues. The electric motor spinning that mechanical shaft suffers its own internal losses, bleeding energy away through waste heat and magnetic resistance in the copper coils. This brings us to the bottom tier, actual motor horsepower. This metric dictates the final, total electrical draw required from the facility's power grid to keep the sequence running. The required motor horsepower is calculated by taking the brake horsepower and dividing it again, this time by the motor's specific electrical efficiency rating. Because of this cascading degradation through the motor and the pump, the electrical grid will always have to supply significantly more energy than what actually goes into moving the water. During daily rounds, operations and maintenance staff are not expected to calculate this three-tier stack of efficiency equations from scratch. Instead, they rely on a standard engineering tool that maps all of this complex mathematical efficiency into a single visual reference, the manufacturer's pump curves. This chart is a typical family of curves for a centrifugal pump, demonstrating exactly how this specific hardware will perform under varying physical conditions. The chart is anchored by two fundamental axes. The bottom horizontal x-axis maps the flow rate in gallons per minute, while the vertical y-axis measures the total head in feet. By taking a facility's required flow rate and its calculated total head, an operator can plot a single intersecting coordinate point directly onto this grid. Layered over this coordinate grid are several parabolic, U-shaped rings stretching across the top half of the chart. These are known as efficiency islands. Notice how the pump's mechanical efficiency peaks in the absolute center of these zones and steadily degrades as you move outward toward the extreme edges of its operating range. Shifting focus down, you'll see a series of solid diagonal lines slicing downward from left to right across the graph. These diagonal markers represent brake horsepower. Because the manufacturer tested the physical unit, the mechanical inefficiencies and internal fluid slippage are already mathematically baked into their placement. By locating where the required flow and head intersect, an operator bypasses the arithmetic entirely. This single graph instantly identifies the exact mechanical power the system demands at that exact moment. Sizing a pump correctly on day one does not guarantee permanent efficiency. Over the lifespan of a facility, physical conditions change. Pipes calcify, demand increases, and equipment ages. When aging hardware struggles to keep up with these evolving demands, the mathematical cascade of power transfer begins to heavily penalize the facility. Modern units are expected to operate at an electrical efficiency of 92% or greater. As older motors degrade, that percentage shrinks, pulling significantly more raw power from the grid to achieve the identical mechanical output. Simultaneously, external modifications, like restructuring an entire pressure zone, can alter the system's total static head, pushing a perfectly functional pump entirely out of its designed efficiency island. When physical geometry changes, the coordinate point migrates outward into a higher brake horsepower requirement. As the motor degrades, the denominator in our power equation shrinks. Both force electrical loads to spike. This reality is why sizing criteria must be kept on site. When a system underperforms, maintenance personnel need those mathematical baselines to determine if the pump itself is failing or if the facility's geography has shifted. Identifying system failure requires looking beyond the single data point of a discharge gauge to measure the gap between the physical lift of the fluid and the total electrical draw. The pump curve provides a persistent map of a facility's mechanical health and energy costs, making it a critical tool for long-term operational oversight.